Oop. Alrighty then. What's going on, folks? It's your friendly neighborhood Professor Cag, swinging through the hallways, highways, and byways of a local Zoom room near you. And today we are going to talk about our fifth and final essay. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, the moment that you all have been waiting for, the end of the semester, is upon us, or that some of you may have been dreading, depending upon where you're at with your work. There are a couple of things that I want us to unpack for this evening's, or excuse me, for our YouTube live this afternoon. The main thing is that I want to introduce to you all the fundamentals of research, beginning with research, right? Not even so much research methodologies necessarily, but research as a field. Sorry, not so much even as a field, actually, but really research as a practice, That's what we're going to get into, folks. Right. So it's the difference is scale. Okay. Um, for our freshman composition or our first year composition courses, we teach in college. First year composition courses at the college level teaches what we call the modes of writing. And what's a part of the modes of writing are actually derived um, from Aristotle's exercises that got rediscovered um, during the Age of Enlightenment, if I'm not mistaken, and that got reabsorbed by the burgeoning universities of the time of the day as a branch of philosophy. And so, like in these like kind of classics, what later on became like classics courses and English composition, like kind of around the 1980s, there began to be a little bit of a divergence in terms of the development of these uh, departments, right, and disciplines. And so there was a bit of a divergence that we got to see between classical studies and, or excuse me, a branch of rhetoric that went off into classical studies and a branch of rhetoric that went off into composition studies or English departments. Um, these exercises got developed and absorbed into these departments and so thus became a part of the norms of um, departments across the entire nation to some extent, or at least in some countries, not all of them, not even close to all of them, but in some countries, they also have a version that kind of mirrors what we have here in the U.S. system too as well. So, anyways, long story short, right? We teach these five modes of writing, and the five modes of composition are what we affectionately teach in freshman composition courses, right? First year composition studies courses. And you know these to be like the modes of writing. So narration, definition, argument, or persuasive writing, research, right? Research argument is another kind of branch on that larger tree there, okay? On the larger tree being the modes of writing. And so today, as we've been throughout this entire semester developing our toolkits. Um, Actually, really, a better way to describe the entire semester would probably be as a journey, right? As we've been walking on this journey into the land of Mordor. Um, we have our bags, and at every single station along the way, we've been able to fill our bags with something new and something like a tool that can help us to improve, enhance, and further develop our literacy skills, but particularly our writing skills, right? Our ability to put together ideas, right? we've learned how to we've learned the core elements and the basics of how to tell our story, how to connect with others, how to connect with other people's hearts and minds, specifically through sensory experiences, right? By um, describing, developing, creating within the mind's eye the ability to visualize what happened and what was said in a given setting, right? That's what we call the elements of narration. We've also learned how to recognize how to recognize at least three things. Um, Whenever somebody is actually speaking in a public setting. We've learned how to identify a speaker's audience. We've learned how to identify or to recognize the relationship, the connection that exists between whatever it is that's being said, so the message and the larger environment in which that message is being spoken, right? Or in other words, the context that surrounds the message, right? We've learned how to actually connect the two together, right? We've also learned how to identify in a speaker's message the means by which the speaker seeks to persuade their audience, right? And that skill is, or excuse me, the collection of those skills there, right? Those tools all go into the component, the part of our bag, right? Our utility belt that is called rhetorical analysis, right? That's our rhetorical analysis bag, right? And right alongside of that, we also discovered how to visually apply the elements of persuasion in a visual format, right? And by using visual rhetoric, right? We've learned how to take texts and images, put them together, compose them in a way that groups and aligns the message in ways that help to reveal or illustrate, right, what your thesis statement is trying to advocate for, right? So there, that's our unit that we actually learn, our third unit, where we learn visual argument. um, and most importantly, within that unit, we develop the skills and the tools to recognize social issues or problems, things that go on within the context, right? um, the context of our everyday lives, right? We develop the skills to learn how to observe critically what's going on around us, right? And also how to identify issues, problems that are affecting people on a wide scale social level, right? People within the social context, people within the context, right? And not only did we learn how to identify those issues, right? But also we've learned how to research, how to look into, how to discover more about the issues, the history of the issues, where the problem came from, right? How it developed, how things got this way, and what people are saying we should do about it, right? You see, if you're kind of recounting what it is that we've learned throughout this entire semester, what you'll see is these little tools and gems that help us to enhance our literacy, our academic literacy, certainly, and also our skills with writing and critical reading, right? Not only reading the word that's in front of us, but reading the world around us, right? You see, I want to highlight this context, right, as it were, that shapes how we arrive at this point near the end of our semester. Because all of those skills, tools, and gems are what you are going to have to draw upon for the last and final essay of this class, your research argument papers. Just as a word of reminder, if you all still have essays that you need to revise, you have until May 10th in order to get them completed and to submit them. Okay. You're going to go right back to where you submitted them initially and go and resubmit them. Okay. I'll be able to see the history of your submissions in Canvas. All right. But if you've not already done, if you have essays that are missing, you need to get on them, okay? And you need to actually complete them prior to completing our fifth and final essay, because the fifth and final essay is really calling for you to it's developed, or excuse me, sorry, the prompt itself is constructed from the point in the journey of the class where we've already learned these skills that I just highlighted and kind of chronicled for us, right? What you don't want to do, right? Other than the obvious thing that you don't want to do is use Chat GPT to write your research paper. Okay. And yes, I have been noticing a lot more of my students, and I'm not calling out anybody in particular. I'm saying this across all of my classes because I'm putting everybody. I want all of you to go on notice. I see students using AI in my classroom, and excuse me, in my papers. All right, and it's not something that you want to fall into the habit of doing. I get the need, I get the pull, and I get um, the convenience that lies behind using AI. Uh, you don't want to use it the way that y'all are using it for the class. It's not working. It's not working for you. Okay, you'll do better to struggle to write the paper, right? And the struggle to get your own ideas out. It did not work for Drake to use AI when he copied Snoop Dogg and Tupac. It did not work for Drake. It will not work for you. I know, you're different than Drake. I get it. You are your own unique individual, but it does not work for anybody. That's the moral to the story. Okay. At least not in an English class. Okay. Because we are trained professionals. So, meaning that we're professional readers. So we know how to distinguish between an AI voice and how not to. So the thing that you don't want to do, certainly aside from not using AI, is that you don't want to actually use, excuse me, you don't want to jump into your research paper without having developed, um, at least even in part, the skills that would ensure you receiving a passing grade for your previous assignments, for your previous writing assignments, right? For the rhetorical analysis, the visual argument slash persuasive, um, persuasive argument, um, as well as the narration, right? You want to actually complete those assignments to the point where it's a satisfactory completion, right? And then to use those skills to develop um, your research argument, right? And part of what I want to show you all today is a way to. Today, I won't only want to focus on introducing you to research. What we'll learn over the week, um, next week, and if not next week, then certainly the week after that, um, we will go over the mechanics of how to put together this research argument. And there is certainly a way to do it that does not require you to use AI. I want you all to learn. This is why y'all are here. This is why y'all are paying your fees, okay? Even if financial aid is paying your fees on your behalf, trust me, your mama, your daddy, your auntie, your uncle, right? Them folks is good law-abiding citizens who paying their taxes and they want to make sure that y'all are making use of their money, right? So they paying for, if you get financial aid, they paying for you to actually take this class, all right? So we want to make good use of mommy, daddy, auntie, uncle, all them folk, right? We want to make use of their money, make good use of their money. Um, but yeah, you definitely over the course of the next at least, excuse me, sorry, at most 2 weeks, I'll teach you all the mechanics of how to put together this essay, and you'll want to learn how to do it. This is the reason why you're here. Okay. So without further ado, let's actually get on into our lecture for today. All right, folks. So please make sure to drop me a like in the chat, click subscribe, shoot me a comment. Let me know who's in the chat. Drop your name, say what's up. I see I got at least one person in the chat. If I got any more, please tap on in with your friendly neighborhood professor who's swinging through the hallways, highways, and byways of a local YouTube room near you. Let's slide on into my DMs. Hey, Tamika, how you doing? It's good to see you. Or rather, good to hear from you. Let me go right here. There we go. Okay. All right, folks. Let me see here. Your tooth still hurt? Let me see if I can. How do I move this? Let me see something. Maybe I need to. Yikes. Okay. Ah, oh my goodness. Oh yeah, no, that sucks. Teeth pulling is it's teeth pulling. It's never fun. Okay, I'm not sure how I'll pop up on y'all's screen right now. I can't really see. Okay, it looks like I'm in the lower left-hand corner. Man, how do I move myself? Let me see. Stop screen sharing. Share a window. No, I don't want to do that. Maybe. Sorry, y'all. Yikes, that is not what I wanted to do. I promise you, I do know how to work technology, y'all. I messing me up. Now, here's what I don't know how to do, folks. I don't know how to move my the window that you see me in, like for the picture in picture, right? Not my shared screen, but my screen. I don't know how to move that box into the I don't know how to move it up. Trying to figure it out, but wow. Heck, this must be what my mom and dad must have felt like the first time I brought home an iPhone. Soon as the phone disappeared, I mean, soon as the buttons on the phone disappeared, they were like, "What is this?" That's how you know you knocking on the door of elderhood when you start looking at stuff like this. So, or maybe that's just what my dad does. Okay, folks, I don't know how to move this thing, so we're gonna work with it the best way that we know how. Um, Drop your questions, drop your comments. Emotionally justifiable outbursts are indeed acceptable in the chat as long as it is about what we are learning. That is perfectly fine. Let's go right on over here. Okay. All right, so we're gonna try to do this. Okay, so let's just focus on what's up here, right? Like kind of at the top. All right, so this here is our beginning steps into research. All right, so first of all, here's what I want for you all to do, right? So those of you all who are watching the recording of this, I want you all to take out your notebooks. I want you all to write these things here down. Certainly, they'll pop up on the final exam, but even more so than that, I want you all to begin to develop your relationship with them. Okay. Um, think about knowledge the way that you think about talking to a person who has caught your eye or your interest, wherever it is that you find these folk at. Okay. And if you ain't said nothing to them yet, right? I want you to, at some point in time, think about it. Okay. However, it is that you can get the however it is that you can establish the connection, right? um, that's the important part. That's the main point. Knowledge is about that. How can we establish the connection? How do we, in the words of an old school famous philosopher by the name of Tevin Campbell, can we talk, right? How do we do that? How do we get some conversation, right? That's what knowledge needs to be for you all, right? Um, your relationship with knowledge, right? I want you all to become aware of that, because the further away that knowledge is from you, right? That is to say, right, the less that you engage with it, you know, and the more that you just kind of observe it without engaging with it, right? Like through verbal communication, right? Or just through some form of acknowledgement, right? The more that you are distant from it, the more it is going to either lose its meaning, lose its coherency, or just quite simply lose its spark. And so in a lot of ways, I just want to kind of highlight that analogy because in a lot of ways, I know that that's a part of the story of being in an online class. That doesn't mean that that has to be the point of that story, right? Or that that has to be the only thing that happens in that story, right? But I just want to demonstrate a certain level of awareness here, okay? It's difficult to be in an online class, and more importantly, it's difficult to be successful in an online class because of the distance, right? But for those of you who are watching, those of you who are at home and you're playing this recording back, right? And those of you who are just listening, right? Because you're at work or you can't actually get to your notes and stuff like that. It's okay. It's okay, right? This here is a judgment-free zone, and I don't want you to feel any pressure about that at the moment, right? Not right now. But as long as you can reconnect, right? Get back connected, then it's all good. We can roll from there. Okay, folks? So that's what I want for you all to do. If you're watching this recording and you're playing it back, I want you all to take notes on these words, these concepts, and these ideas that we're exploring here for this introduction into research. Okay. So, first and foremost, your first thing that I want for you all to write down: research. What is it? What do I do with it? Right. Well, here's our formal definition of research. Let's start off with what it does, right? Research examines a variety of different kind of sources of information, right? And I put the emphasis on sources of information because that's the item that has currency in this endeavor, the endeavor of research, right? The point and purpose of it is to explore a variety of different positions, right? Remember how um, at different points throughout the semester, we've learned about persuasive writing and we've seen videos that talk about how to respond, right? Or how to rebuttal to the other side's point. And part of the thing that I want to highlight for you all is that there is not just one other side, right? I know that in traditional academic spaces, or at least in high school, and also too in college for that matter, it is oftentimes framed. Uh, Persuasive arguments, academic arguments, are oftentimes framed with this outfit of a kind of thesis antithesis dynamic, right? Where there's a position and then there's an anti position, right? Or somebody who is opposed. That exhausts me because it's so limited. It's so limited. And also, not only is it limited, it's just simply from a practical standpoint, when we look at when we look in public spaces, and all we have to do is, I mean, the reproduction of public dialogues is so readily available through social media and through a 24-hour news cycle that it's quite easy to just quite simply you turn your head and you can see a public argument, right? Or like a public engagement happening around you in your very city. So it's we're overly exposed to moments in which, you know, there's a social issue or just an issue, and then you see, um, you know, a variety of people who are affected by that social issue, and then they chime in, right? Or they respond or speak out in public, right, about the issue itself. And oftentimes, the positions that individuals actually take, especially for public issues, the positions that folks end up adopting are they cannot be boiled down into simple uh, um, thesis antithesis, right, or a simple black and white, or simply um, um, uh, for or against. That is in the idealized vacuum aesthetic realm called academia, okay, where we create these highly fictionalized um, situations, right, of debate and engagement, right, which is usually what the classroom is for, right, and certainly it's a useful tool and exercise, right. However, outside of the classroom, in the everyday world, right, um, there's rarely a position that simply gets boiled down into two sides, right? There's usually multiple sides, and there's a good reason for that because outside of this highly anesthetized vacuum theoretical world that we create in our classrooms, um, as professors, right, across academia, both colleges and universities, right, and also too even in schools, right, across, excuse me, aside from those highly anesthetized places, right, in the everyday rough and tumble of everyday life, you know, people are more complicated than simply Pepsi or Coca Cola, right? If all you had in the world was just simply a choice between McDonald's or Burger King, food would be a little boring, right? So in in the everyday rough and tumble, as well as the realm of scientific research, right? There always exists an understanding as well as an assumption that there are multiple sides to a particular issue. And so when that this is the room, this is the portion of our journey where we begin to enter into the realm of scientific analysis and research, right? A scientific approach to persuasive argument, as it were, right? And so I want to try to provide that context for us because it helps us to understand really what the goal and function of research is, which is to explore all of those various positions. That is what you call research. When you go off and you look up and discover, oh wow, you mean to tell me that there's you mean to tell me that there's more to the Kendrick Lamar and Drake uh, rap beef than just Kendrick Lamar and Drake? Why, yes. Yes, some people have actually chose to side with J. Cole. Right? Uh, oh shoot, you mean to tell me that there's more than just Pepsi and Coca-Cola that exist out there? Well, yeah, yeah, right. They have apple soda. They've got blueberry. They've got creamsicle soda, right? So I want to highlight and emphasize the significance of exploring various positions on a particular issue because that's exactly what you're called to do here, right? Not only in the rough and tumble of everyday life does there exist, multiple sides on any one given issue, right? Not just, two things can be true at the same time. Obviously, two things can be true at the same time. It's not only two that we should be concerned with, right? There are multiple things that can be tiny t truth, right, at the same time. And so, part of what you want to do as a researcher is to explore those tiny t truths through research, right? That is to say, by exploring and excavating through library database research, In some cases, empirical data, in other cases, right, testimonial, lived experiences, right? In other cases, surveys, questionnaires, right? The results from that. A white sheet, right? Or what we call, excuse me, sorry, a white paper, right? These are all different things, tools, elements that you would want to actually go through and search for to gather up information that would help to provide you, as the researcher, with the fullest understanding of what should be done or what people have researched, and through, right, the development of research, argue that X, Y, or Z should be done to resolve this issue, right? That is precisely your role here in this particular essay. Writing assignment number 5, the research argument, right? So, what research does at the very core is that it explores a variety of different sources to provide a solution to a particular problem. Through the assessment of data, through the synthesis of that data, you can provide a solution to the problem, right? By pulling it all together, pulling together all the facts from a variety of different sources, right? The more diverse the sources, the better, the stronger, the more ethos that you actually have, right? The more strategically diverse um, your sources are, right? The better or the stronger credibility you'll actually have, right? And I'll talk a little bit about how to diversify your source streams. Um, but let's start first, and excuse me, next with a key question. Well, just how do I even come up with a topic, right? Well, part of what the purpose of research is, it's to explore a question, right? To explore what's been said or what's been done in response to a particular question, right? You can, for yourselves and for this class here, right? We can actually start from a topic from one of your previous papers, since you've already, or rather, one of your previous writing assignments, since you've already done, some of you have done some research, right? But a good majority of you all, for your visual arguments, part of what I noticed is that you all did a Google search for, you know, wage slavery. And you copied and pasted an image onto a blank sheet. Some of you did that, right? Enough of my students across all of my classes ended up doing that, and it raised my eyebrows. I'm like, what are why? Right? But part of what we have to um excuse me, part of the point of that particular unit was to teach us the core basics of not only how to construct a thesis statement, but also to where to go to find information, how to pull together key data points, key vocabulary, key concepts from the readings and the documentaries that we had in the course itself. Excuse me. That we've been watching throughout the course itself in our very own visual arguments, right? So you can start with the topic that you worked on from there, and you can extend the research now, right? And for those of you who actually outlined your visual arguments, like if you actually wrote out an outline for your visual argument, great job, because if you did that and you still have that outline, you now have a first draft of an outline for your writing assignment number 5, right? If you choose to continue on with that same topic. So that's actually a really cool connection that I want to highlight for y'all to do, especially for this upcoming writing assignment number 5. Okay. But suffice to say, after you create your topic, right? And there's also too, even let me actually switch my screen here. I want to, let me see if it'll let me share this one. No. No. Okay. So let me do that. Let me stop sharing and I'll reshare. Okay, so part of what I want to highlight for y'all is that if we go down to modules for this week, week 12, you all will see under 12.1, getting started, introduction to research arguments, how to formulate research questions. Okay. So, part of what I want to highlight for y'all is what are you supposed to do with your sources? Well, first and foremost, read them. Like, read them. You have to read them. Okay. Here's a short, brief, just kind of um, introduction into the importance of developing and discovering research questions, which you all can find a PDF of right here, just down below. No. Okay, there we go. There we go. That's what I wanted to do. Right. So here are right a list of controversial issue questions. Now, there's only two that I'm going to say don't write about. I'm only going to ban number one, the issue of abortion, and also what was the other one? Oh, gun control. Okay. So only these two are the only two that are banned, 1 and 18. Okay. Part of the reason for it, there's just absolutely the people from whom we see research done on both um, of these issues. Uh, the issue itself doesn't even allow for stasis. They're not even asking the same questions, right? So it's a futile argument that would not serve um, any practical use value for your academic experience here at Cerritos College, or really just at any point in time throughout your high school or college tenure. Um, so we won't actually write about those two issues, right? So gun control and abortion. Okay, those are banned. Any of the other ones, perfectly fine, perfectly fine. Okay. Um, and if you actually take a look down here again, you'll see some topics. Okay. So all research questions, excuse me, all research topics really spring from a particular question, from a critical question that is asked. Okay. So that's really how you can begin to think about how to develop your topic, right? How to create your topic, right? Or where, your topic can come from. Okay. How to create a meaningful topic. Right? It should start from key questions, right? It should start from uh, really, it should start from a place of looking to solve an issue or looking to resolve an issue, a problem that's affecting people on a wide scale social level. Okay. So that's the main idea behind research questions. But suffice it to say, when it comes to research, right, every single topics, every single topic is derived from a question, right? What we call the research question. And so, in that, you really want to make sure that you go and discover what questions have yet to be answered or resolved in the process of your research. You find a topic, you go out and you actually look up through the databases, starting with the general reference texts, what these topics here are about, what the history is behind these topics, and where they came from, how things got to be this way for them. Next, after you've explored your topic and learned more about the history, right, behind its development, then you want to start to get more clear on, okay, well, who's saying what should be done about this particular issue, right? And in that part of the search, you can go to websites like procon.org. You can go to websites or databases like Issues and Controversies, right? And they'll help to provide some research that helps to articulate, um, where uh, some of the positions might be derived from, right? But what you'll discover on your own is in the process of going through those sources there, right? What you'll discover is that you want to make sure that you're identifying or keeping track of the various positions that people curate in response to the problem, right? Um, so one way to do that is by making like a readers list. And in that readers list or that a list of sources, right? A list of research materials. Uh, what you want to actually focus on is identifying the audience that that source speaks to, right? So that is to say, who is that message directed towards, right? Who's in the intended subject of the message, right? So that's what you want to actually keep in mind as you're thinking through the development, excuse me, as you're thinking through the discovery part of your research topic, right? So part of the way to actually kind of break down like a kind of subsection, a way that you can actually break down the audiences into subsections is by looking at who's the primary audience from the characteristics that you recognize throughout the research that you collect on the various subjects, excuse me, on the various sources that you explore, right? Who's the primary audience and then who's the secondary audience? Okay. So part of the way that you can begin to think about the primary audience is who's directly intended to be the recipients of this message, right? And then the secondary audience speaks to those folks who would benefit from the message, but who might not be primarily intended uh, to hear it, right? But people who could benefit from it, right? Um, and in the mix of you discovering not only the variety of different audiences, right? The constellation of audiences that exist, right? Amongst the constellation of sources that you have, right? In that exploration and discovery of more information and more positions or more thoughts that go into how we could potentially resolve this problem, right? The social problem. In that, what you always want to develop is your own position, right? Well, how do you develop your position? By synthesizing elements, original elements from the sources that you've researched to create a new interpretation, right? A new remix, as it were, of those original elements into your new position, right? In other words, right, your research paper is still first and foremost an argument, meaning that you need to address a particular issue, you have to state your position on that issue, and you have to support your position with good facts, reasons, and evidence. Okay. To put it bluntly, there's no difference between the art and the mechanics of what we've been learning in previous papers as far back as the narrative or the critical memoir, the rhetorical analysis, and the visual argument and this paper that I'm calling for you to write right now, the research argument. Okay. They all require a thesis and they all require research to support its arguments. All right. Okay. Now I'm going to take a look at the chat. Chat, talk to me what we got going on. Any questions so far? Miss Tamika, you still with me? Excellent. Okay, cool, cool, cool. Any questions so far? Okay, so let's go ahead on and we're going to transition on over into our Canvas module, module 12, building research arguments, pulling everything together. I just want to kind of review this very briefly with you all so that way we can just kind of highlight some greatest hits throughout this module. First and foremost, we have our in our Get Started section, an introduction into research arguments, followed by what I showed you all a few minutes ago in terms of formulating a research question. All arguments start from questions, right? Repeat after me. If you don't have an issue, you don't have an argument. If you don't have an issue, you don't have an argument. Okay. Part of the reason why I want you all to repeat that with me is because if you don't have an issue, you don't have an argument. Meaning that if this here is just if you don't make it clear what the problem is that people are faced with, and in the context or background section of your essay, provide us with the history of that problem. Okay. Tell us where it came from, right? How things developed through the demonstration of your source work and your source material, right? If you don't have a problem to research to develop a background on or anything like that, right, then you don't have an argument. Okay. Right. So that's what this section here kind of highlights for us, followed by our guides and strategies. Right. So this here is going to give us a little bit, and this here is where we're going to actually steer the course a bit, is towards finding different sources. What are the various kinds of sources that make up or that inform a research argument? And then we'll put a button on this module 12.2 by examining and exploring the outline for the research argument in and of itself, the actual essay. Okay. Uh, in terms of your activities for this week, right, what's due this Sunday is just quite simply a post writing assessment. Now, this here, all of you should have your writing assignment number 2 rhetorical analysis grades returned back to you. Those were returned back, I think, probably about a couple weeks ago now. And for those of you who still have revisions that you need to do because you saw my comments and you met with me, let's make sure to get those revisions in by May 10th. So the deadline is coming up. That's about maybe about 3 weeks, 3 weekends for us from now. So let's make sure to get that in on time so we can get the grade that reflects the development of our thinking. All right. But provided that you all have completed writing assignment number 2, I want you all for the discussion board this week to complete discussion board number 8, which is just going to be a very brief survey. Okay. So let's start here. And excellent. I see your comment here, Ms. Tamika. Thank you so much. That's great. Let me know. Don't hesitate if you have any questions, okay? Just drop it right on in the chat. I'll be checking it periodically. All right, folks. So, as we move right on into the introduction to research arguments, I want you all to actually review this crash course. It's about maybe a 12 to 15-minute video short on research papers, research argument, the art of scientific research, and the approach of scientific research. Okay. Um, Here, what you'll actually see are some of the main core concepts that are related to this week's readings from chapter 15 in the written arguments book. Okay. What you can see in chapter 15, which is here provided in this PDF, is going to be a clear textual breakdown of a research proposal argument, what it is, how it functions, what some examples are, right? What the components of it are, what the mechanics are, how it functions, right? How to do it. That's what's going to be explained and derived here in chapter 15 from written arguments. And part of the thing that I want to highlight for you on what the chapter will make a point to reemphasize to you is that there are two kinds of research argument proposals. There are practical proposals, right? Things that we could do through immediate local action, right? So there's an immediate local solution to a particular problem, right? Um, uh, you know, there's a busy street corner on your block, right? At the end of your block, and cars just fly up and down, right? Every single day, especially between the hours of 2 to 5, in which kids are at play during that time, right? So they're flying up and down this block, right? While children are at play. And there have been X amount of accidents over the past year. Okay. Um, Part of what in this situation here, part of what I want to highlight is that one, there is a problem that's affecting people within a neighborhood or a community. That is to say, it's a problem that's affecting more than just one person, right? That's one. Two, this is a problem that can also, at the same time, you can have two responses to it. You can have an immediate practical response, right? Or you could have a more right, and or you could have a longer term, um, more permanent response that might take a longer time to implement, but that could also last longer, right? Um, Through the composition of new policy, right? So the first approach is what we call a practical proposal, right? Where there's an immediate local solution to a particular problem. So an immediate local solution to the problem of cars flying up and down this block, right? Especially at this intersection right here. Boom, we could put up a crossing guard right at two corners. Okay. A crossing guard at two corners, or at least a traffic person, right? A volunteer traffic person can go there, right, with a traffic vest and also to a stop sign that says slow down, right, or stop kids at play. Boom, we could also to immediately put a sign, somebody, right, a part of the PTA, somebody a part of the neighborhood watch, right, somebody who's a part of the local neighborhood could create a sign that says children at play, slow down 25 miles an hour. That's the immediate response that could be developed, right? And that could be planned out. An immediate local response that could be planned out, right? That's what it could look like. Okay. There's also another approach in which we could actually take this issue, we can take stats, we can do surveys, we could conduct questionnaires and go around the neighborhood to get feedback from the community, synthesize that data into a report, go directly to City Hall, to the city council, or at an open public forum, right, at the City Hall, gather up research or gather up signatures and try to create a bill or a piece of local legislation that creates more safeguards for children around our neighborhoods and more speed zone um, areas where safe speed limits are ensured when or in the vicinity of children, right? In the parameters of a school district, right? Um, in that you right, you can have legislation that says, hey, make sure that you have speed bumps, right? Um, around every single school zone. And make sure that stoplights exist at every single school, at every single intersection that surrounds a school, right? Within a 1 mile radius of that school, right? This is all that kind of legislation that could be, excuse me, a policy proposal approach that could, um, over time, provide a more permanent, stable solution that could help to reduce the problem or that could help to resolve the problem at the core, right? Um, there are indeed three major components or structures to a a proposal, right? Whether it's practical or it's a policy-based proposal, right? One is the description of the problem, which is why I'm emphatically reminding you that if you don't have an issue, you don't have an argument, right? We need to research the problem and also not only the problem, but more importantly, excuse me, sorry, in the process of what we need to do is research the solution, right? And in the process of researching the solution, the history of how things got to be this way, in other words, right, the history of the problem is going to come along the way of you researching the solution itself. All right. So, the number one thing that you want to actually research or focus on in your research is the solution, right? And in that, you want to develop and sharpen your understanding of the problem in such a way that you can describe the problem to somebody, anybody who has absolutely no idea about about this thing even existing, about this problem even being an issue, right? The next part of the structure, right, for a proposal argument is to propose a solution, right? And not only to propose it, right, but really to propose it in a particular statement, a thesis statement. Okay, I'm going to add that on there, right? To state your thesis. That is your proposed solution. Okay, I need for you all to actually, I need to impress upon you all the importance of your thesis statement and its relationship to the solution, right? What you are arguing for is this solution to that problem. Okay. And I need three reasons that support why we should do or take that action, right? Let me give you an example, right? Well, sorry, excuse me. Let me back up for a second. Let me button this off, right? Let me close this. The third part of a proposal argument requires that you justify the proposed solution. So this actually takes me into where I was about to go, right? Just a second ago, right? So your logical reasons. Your logical reasons function as a justification, right? They work to support, to provide a rationale for the proposed solution. Let me give you an example. Let's say that I discover that the pesticides that farmers have been using on their produce was actually harmful in every single form possibly possible and imaginable. What if, let's say, sorry, not what if, but let's say in this scenario, we've discovered an issue with pesticides. So, if we recognize that the problem is pesticides and how they're used, period, in general, but especially how they're used on our produce, right? My thesis statement needs to directly address the issue or concern, right? So here's the issue or concern. What should we do about pesticides that are used in everyday general food produce? What should be done about pesticide use? right? That's the question. Okay. My thesis statement, which is the combination of an arguable claim and three logical reasons, as we've learned from Unit 3, right, is not going to be anything different on this writing assignment. Remember, this is an argument. So we still want to stick with the combination of an arguable claim and three logical reasons as the foundational basis of our thesis statements. My response to that question is going to be my arguable claim. Here's what I argue. Pesticides should be banned because this is all one sentence. They endanger the lives of workers. They're harmful to the Earth's atmosphere, or they eat away at the Earth's atmosphere, and they're potentially fatal to consumers, right? So I argue that they should be banned, but here's the difference between a traditional proposal argument, or rather a traditional persuasive argument, and a proposal argument, right? A proposal argument does not necessarily, it doesn't provide justification for an observation. It provides justification for a solution. So here's the problem with the thesis statement that I just articulated. Pesticides should be banned, right? That is certainly an arguable solution, right? But my justification, my logical reasons, sure, in general, support that argument. However, they don't justify a solution, right? They don't justify the solution necessarily, right? So, what should be done about pesticides? Well, if we argue that, right, pesticides should be banned, well, no, actually, I'll take that back. Let me walk that statement back. Right, pesticides should be banned, right? If we ban them, excuse me, part of what we have to show in throughout the logical development of our proposed solution, part of what we would have to show is the impact or the effect of that logical reason on the group that's most affected by the issue itself, by the problem, right? So, in other words, what we would have to show is okay, for the first logical reason, if we argue that, um, you know, pesticides should be banned because they're harmful to workers, right? Okay, well, we have to demonstrate how they're harmful to workers, first and foremost. So, there needs to be a kind of um, uh, a structure in as you're writing this particular paragraph, right, of the body of your research argument. There has to be a section in here where you are putting on display the important stats, facts, and evidence that demonstrate pesticides harm to workers, to farm workers, right? That's the first part of what you need to establish, right? Show and demonstrate a clear impact, right, of pesticides being harmful to workers. Right? And of course, I'm not asking you to create this. This is what you are researching, right? This is what we have to kind of gather, right? The next thing that you have to do within that same logical reason is demonstrate the effects, or if you have research, right, that discusses or that unpacks the effects of um, how workers' health, uh, how workers' health may have been or may be impacted when they are not exposed to pesticides, right? Then you can create a kind of analogy, right, or a parallel that illustrates or that carries your argument even further, right? And so part of what I want to highlight for you is that's the difference between a persuasive argument and a research argument. A research argument is going to demonstrate, right, further than a persuasive argument. It's going to further demonstrate because you have more sources that you're able to pull, and therefore, ideally, a wider scope, right, or a more refined scope on the particular, not only the problem, but also to the proposed solutions that we are looking to implement for this particular problem, right? So your research argument is going to take it a step further. That's the point here. All right. And that taking it a step further is what we call justification of or for the proposed solution. Okay. That's what it means to justify your solution. All right. So all of these things here are actually broken down in a very clean way. Here you can actually see ideas, right? Our university should eliminate the Greek system because doing so will improve our university's academic reputation. Here's some of the evidence, right, that eliminating Greek systems, the Greek system will improve our academic reputation, right? Here's some of the key facts or points, right, that a researcher pulled together as they crafted and researched their argument, right? Notice that these key facts here inform, right? They work to support the logical reason, right? So if this were an essay, this would be developed all in across a variety of different paragraphs, right? Each one could be its own paragraph, or you could, depending upon how what your topic sentences are. Let me see, because doing so would improve the university's academic reputation, excessive partying, atmosphere, housing study. Last year, the average of students, fraternities, new pledges have so many house students initiatives. Students think about the rush more than about the academic life. The way that these grounds here are laid out, I would make each one of these into a paragraph on themselves, in and of themselves, and then I would weave in some of the statistics, facts, and evidence that I've researched that help to demonstrate this point that's being highlighted in each one of these grounds here, right? Um, so I want you all to actually kind of read through this entire chapter, because what it's going to do is it's going to actually break down how to develop your proposal argument. It's going to give you some examples of them too as well. And really it's going to give you an overall guide for how to really write this next paper, okay? So let's make sure that you all read through chapter 15, okay, proposal arguments, from the introduction to research arguments section that's under Canvas 12.1. Okay. Next is what I showed you earlier, right? This here's the breakdown of the research questions. Here you can find a list or a PDF of the list of the research questions. The only two that are banned that you cannot write on is abortion and gun control. Okay. Next is a kind of breakdown, a more thorough breakdown of how to write the original papers, but also a short write-up on research papers and how to develop ideas and finding sources, right? So some of these links here that are provided are you really want to try to explore some of these links, because they help to provide with some resources that I think you might find helpful throughout learning the discovery part of this research argument unit. Okay. Understanding different kinds of sources. This here comes specifically from chapter 16. I don't want to show you all the entire chapter here, but just some key elements from it. One, first and foremost, here's a rhetorical overview of print sources. So you have at least a group of genres. You have a description of the authors and the perspectives that are usually offered in those kinds of sources, and then also steps for how to analyze them, or not analyze them, how to recognize them. Right. So on the one hand, you have academic books, right? The books that you find in our campus library. You also have trade books, which are books that you'll find in the trade section of our library as well. Most of these resources can be found in our library or on our school's library website, right? So you have reference books. Things like Wikipedia is considered a reference. However, it's in terms of the academic skill or ranking, it's not necessarily ranked very high in terms of its ethos and credibility in academic spaces, right? So we're going to avoid relying solely or primarily on Wikipedia, right, and Google. And we do want to actually take a look at some of these more academic sources that are provided in terms of like an encyclopedia, right, which you could find through our Cerritos College Library database websites, right? Aside from books, we have what are called periodicals. Now, periodicals are anything that comes out on a timed or monthly or quarterly basis, right? It can even come out like on a kind of bi-weekly basis. So anything like scholarly journals, right, or academic articles, right? Magazines that come from either kind of public affairs or even trades or newspapers and news magazines, right? All of those are examples of what we call periodicals, right? Even kind of Cosmo, right? Or popular niche magazines, right? Elle magazine models and stuff, right? You also have .coms. We used to have .biz. You probably have never heard of this. This here is a very old person's term. Okay. You also have .orgs and also .edus. Oftentimes, well, most importantly, you also have .govs, right? Way back in the day. Again, y'all would not know about this, but you used to have these things called .mils or kind of .military sites. We don't have them anymore, so don't worry about that. Each of these websites, these are various kinds of websites that our book here is actually broken down into the type of site, the kind of author that puts together that information, and then what the characteristics are for you to identify them. So please make sure that you're going through and you are exploring and reading just on the basics of books versus websites, books versus trade, scholarship versus popular texts, right? Print sources versus cyber sources, right? And here's also too what you'll find is a criteria for evaluating a particular website, right? These here are some of the key questions that you want to ask yourself. Okay. So without further ado, folks, this here is where I'm going to actually resolve our YouTube live. Okay. Today we actually, just to recap, we discussed and covered sources. Also too, we talked about what is a research argument or a research paper? How do I come up with a topic? What's the purpose and function of a research question? How do we identify it and get clear about audiences? How to develop our positions, right? And also too, just what is a research paper or research in general, right? And what do I do with it, right? So that's our quick and easy recap of what we discussed today. I'm your friendly neighborhood Professor CAG. I'll be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel, to discuss the mechanics of how to compose after you have read chapter 15. I want you all to read that first, okay, folks? You got to read that first. Read that thing first, man. And when you read it, what you'll see is that you'll develop an understanding and language for what it is that I'm talking about when we go through and we have to like kind of put it together, right? Without that foundation or without that understanding, then it's going to sound like I'm talking ancient Greek, okay? And last time I checked, I don't think they teach ancient Greek anymore in our K-12 system. So unless you have parents who are super duper nerds like myself, do the reading. Okay, folks. All right, man. Thank y'all so much for taking some time out of your day just to kick it with your friendly neighborhood Professor CAG. I hope that you all make sure that you have a wonderful day. keep your head up, keep it above water. Make sure that you show yourself some love, give yourself a smile. Tell a friend to tell a friend about Professor Cag's class and tell them to jump on in. I'm here. I am available. I hope that you all take care of yourselves and also take care of each other. I'll see you all next week. Have a great day.